Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the School of Data Journalism here in Perugia. Yesterday, we talked about the state of data journalism in Italy, how data journalism is being done at The Guardian, at the New York Times, and we looked at what 2 Pulitzer Prize winners have done in this area. Today, our panelists are going to speak about the value of data journalism for journalism as a whole, and also for newsrooms, and are going to look into business models and sustainability, and also how the value of data journalism can be measured. I'll hand over to Lucy to give a few logistical details, and then we can start.
Okay, so this is number 3 of 8 of our data journalism workshops. Just a couple of announcements on some of the other ones that are happening today, because we have 3 today. If you haven't had enough. The second one today is the Information Wants to Be Free workshop, which is at 2 o'clock in Hotel San Gallo, and that is focusing on FOI requests and how to use them and how to use some of the tools which can make doing them on kind of scale a lot easier. And then the last one today is making data pretty, about visualization and using some of the panelists which are here are going to speak to us as well about making your data beautiful. We do have a couple more places for that one, although we promise we are actually going to limit the spaces on that one, unlike yesterday. So if you do want to take part in that, turn up at the beginning, and we'll take the first come, first serve ones of those. And the last notice that I have is that tomorrow we're going to launch the Data Journalism Handbook in the session, which is the first session in the morning. So if you do want to get the first view of the epic work, which a lot of our panelists here have put a lot of time into, and many others, come tomorrow at 9:30. It's 9:30, isn't it? Yeah.
And one last thing, if after this session we're going to announce the nominees of the first edition of the Data Journalism Awards. So if you want to find out who they are, stay with us after the session.
Okay, brilliant. So we'll hand over to our data journalism veterans who have saved their newsroom with data journalism.
Grazie Lucy, grazie Liliana. So welcome back. I see many of the faces from yesterday and many more. And I see that the early hour doesn't discourage presence and interest in data, and doesn't diminish interest in data journalism. So we have a hope here. To my far left, Mirko Lorenz, who is with Deutsche Welle as a freelancer and information architect. Simon Rogers, many of you remember him from yesterday and last year, is editor-in-chief for the data blog at The Guardian. Dan Nguyen is a new presence at the festival, and a very welcome one, is from ProPublica. He does many things at ProPublica we'll hear about. And am I right, you also write the Nerds blog? That's one of your works. Aaron Pilhofer was here with us yesterday as well, and heads the interactive news media at the New York Times. And last but not least, Karine Barr is a freelancer data journalist in London, working for CityWire. And I should recall her work, her excellent data work on European structural funds with Financial Times and the Bureau for Investigative Journalism. And we'll hear, I guess, more about those funds during the festival. As usual, our time is limited and is running, so I'll pass it over to Mirko to start us off with his work. Or no, wait, we're hooked up, so we're data journalists, so we're limited by our only limit is technology here. And since you are wired up, Simon, why don't you start and go with it?
Good morning, everybody. I apologise for anybody that was here yesterday, because it probably sound remarkably similar. I suppose today we were talking about kind of journalism in the newsroom and how it works for us day to day. And so I've kind of got some slides, which is, and they're basically the ones I want to show you are at either end of this presentation. So I'm going to show you a couple of things, and then I'll have to whiz through where we are. But I don't know if we can bring those up. There you go. So where do we come from? I guess is that, you know, at the Guardian, there is this tradition which I didn't even realise until I started doing this stuff of kind of data within journalism. This is the first Guardian from 1821, and in those days the news was not on the front page because that was valuable advertising space. It's obviously much less valuable now than it was then, and news stories were on the back page, and this is the back page of the first ever Guardian, right? So. And what it is, yeah, it's there's a big table of data, and that data was leaked to us by somebody. And what it is, it's a list of schools in Manchester with the Manchester Guardian, and the number of pupils in each school and how much funding it got. Now that is not controversial data, right? Anybody can get that. But in 1821, it was 60 years before education was compulsory, and so it was very, very political. And kids didn't go to school during the week. Most kids worked during the week. They were valuable members of the economy. And so it was a very, very political issue, you know, where education was coming from, and it was being provided for by schools. So now, in England, certainly Sunday school is something where you go to learn the Bible. In 1821, it's somewhere where you went to learn to read and write. And it was leaked to us by somebody who basically, let me see the slide up there, said that essentially, and to paraphrase what you're saying, is really that without knowing what's going on in the world, things can't get any better. So we've changed a little bit in the way we present that information. This is something which we do quite a lot, and probably some of you have seen me talk about before, but it's quite an important thing for us, because what it is, it's basically all it shows is public spending by government department, right? Straightforward information. But because of coming from the UK, a country where, you know, although we kind of profess to open data, we're not terribly good at it. And stuff like this you have to get from government annual reports. So each of those circles is a different government department. For each of those departments, we have to go through an annual report, which is in a PDF, you know, which as you know, PDFs are the enemies of open data, and we have to go through those PDFs, extract the information, then go back to say, well, that's not right, why is that wrong? Or, you know, the Ministry of Defence, for example, this year had no data for the whole financial year in their annual report. Now, they can kind of get away with that because nobody looks at these things. But from us, so traditionally, I guess what we would do is that information would live on my hard drive as somebody who's working with graphics. And I guess what's different about what we do now is that we'll publish that data and make it available and see if there are other people out there who can do more with it, who can do better with it. Because the one thing I've learned from doing this job is there are loads of people out there in the world who know more about things than we do. So one of the things Julia was asking about is kind of how it works for us day to day within the newsroom. So we're quite lucky because we sit in the newsroom. We're about as far from the main news desk editors as I am from Liliana over there, so we're very, very close to them, and you know, news organisations are all about geography. Right, so certainly with The Guardian, it's all about geography. It's where you sit and how your relationships are with the desk so that you can see those conversations, because you know, day to day you get these little conversations, huddles and things when the story breaks, and make sure you're kind of part of that discussion has been a really important thing for us. If you're part of that discussion, you get things in the paper and you get things online, and you're seen as kind of an important part of what you do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to whiz through this really quickly, if I can, because I want to show kind of how it works day to day, and I really apologise for having to go through another slide, but on Prezi there's no other way on the iPad app to do this. So this is my normal presentation in less than 20 seconds, right? So yeah, so it's very much, it's kind of, for us, it's all about geography. It's all about talking to the desk as much as possible, making sure we're kind of part of the story and part of the way that they work day to day, and part of that conversation. I promise I'm really there. And what I was going to say, I suppose the second part of this was just to say that a lot of what we do is really it's just kind of perspiration and you know, kind of daily tediousness, because a lot of data journalism is not the kind of exciting stuff you do at the end of getting pieced together. It's all that kind of that work that we have to do at the beginning. And what that means is that we often start off the day with an idea about what's going to be a story, and then we get to and that completely changes by the end of the day because of the data that we get, how it works, and the kind of work that we have to do to it. So we'll start off with, there might be a breaking news story, or there might be something that the news editors are interested in, or something that we're interested in. And one of the things about what we do, I guess, is that the way that I work often is I choose things to focus on that I'm interested in. I had a very good news editor once who was saying, if you choose stories that you're interested in, then there'll be somebody else out there who's interested in them too. And it really works with data stories, because it's very important that for us, that you kind of find things that work for other people. And then when we get that data in, I'm just going to promise I'll be there in a second. When you get that data in, we spend a lot of time cleaning it up, and we have the whole PDF thing that I just mentioned. Here we go. The whole PDF thing I just mentioned, which is really important. Plus, you get things like the Office for National Statistics in the UK still thinks it's publishing books. So the data is beautifully formatted, it looks lovely, but what it is behind that is merged cells, hidden columns, and then you get the whole formatting thing. Is this formatted as a percentage, or is it actually a percentage? Those kind of horrible things. So we spend a lot of time faffing around with that data, and then working out how you can bring different data sets together. So stuff like, at a very basic level, even just having kind of geographical codes, and having the same geographical codes on two data sets so you can compare one place, is really, really important. It's one of those things you never realise how important it is until you start doing it every day. So, we have an issue, the Guardian calls Burma, right? But the UN calls Burma Myanmar. That kind of stuff causes us a lot of problems. So then we start thinking, what's the data going to mean? And then you get a spreadsheet, but then you've got to kind of get it together, and then we kind of perform the calculations in a way. That bit there, it starts to become interesting. Because when we've done that, you realise that there are things that are not right. There's a whole sanity check process which we have to go through. So, for instance, one of the things that I was looking at this data set recently about was carbon emissions. Well, that'd be interesting. We should match that up with population and stuff. And the UN population database, it doesn't now, but when it was first issued as a spreadsheet, it had the population for the UK was missing a 0. So we had even higher carbon emissions than we really do. And it just looked wrong, right? But it's the first time looking at it, wow, that's enormous. So there's a whole kind of process of sanity checking something and thinking, can that possibly be right? And at the end of it, okay, so it's the output. And I say output because people assume the kind of data journalism results in, visualizations and pictures, and it can do. The great thing about it is it's such a kind of flexible format that often it can result in anything. It can be a story, even just publishing a number that's interesting can be part of that story, and that's how it's changed, I suppose. So just the end of it really is that we kind of go through this whole process, and at the end of it we get interesting stories, but that process has become really kind of a key part of what we do every day, and that's I guess where we are part of the newsroom, because often people have these spreadsheets, have these data sets, and they just won't know where to start. It's too big. WikiLeaks for Iraq was 392,000 documents, right? And that's not big data in the way that the kind of mobile phone records are big data, but that's enough to be intimidating for a reporter who hasn't got experience in that stuff. So I suppose what we're about is trying to kind of help the news desk be part of their process, and also generate some good stories along the way.
Thank you, Simon. I have many questions, and I guess the audience will have too, and we'll open up the floor to questions later on. But let's have a first round to get a taste of what you guys are all doing and how you're doing it. Mirko, do you want to hook up and show us the Deutsche Welle?
Synchronized screen.
So we get the iPad versus laptop here, and the iPad is still winning. So, is this good?
Should be working.
Okay, we're set.
Thank you. So, So my presentation is really short. Just as an introduction, I started as a journalist, but since 1995, which is a long time from now, I'm working on internet projects, helping companies and people to make sense of tools, building content management systems and so on. And this is the work of information architects, and I cover a bit of how that relates to data journalism and what we need to do about the newsroom in this presentation. It's really short. So first, I tried to answer the question, how can data save your newsroom? And the answer right now is maybe. And it's because we need to get together 3 building blocks from my point of view. The first one is people, the second is making sense of the tools, and a third one, which is more into the future, is like what business model could be used to actually, make it sustainable. So first one is people. Basically, the very basic notion of data journalism is very simple. As Simon said, it's nothing new to journalism, it's nothing new to communication. It's asking the question of how big is that? How does a new information compare to the stuff that we know? This is a basic rule coming from Edward Tufte, it's not from me. And I want to show you an example. This here shows the world's largest photo libraries by size, like a tree map. And only on the left in the small place, you see like the Library of Congress is that really tiny dot down there. So it's harder for us today to judge what is big and what is small, right? This is just one example, but in reporting about stuff that is happening, whether it's unemployment, the national debt or whatever, compared to what? And very often we simply don't know that. So, and that's really a problem. And I translated an article that Aaron Pillhofer gave to a Stanford fellow recently, because I found it very important. And basically Aaron said media today is not data-driven. If anybody wants to get the link, I can hand it out. And I think what we're seeing right now, it's aside from the New York Times and the Guardian and Texas Tribune and some others who are really moving it forward, I find the wake-up process in journalism as a whole very slow. This is work that we did in Germany last year. I've been working for almost a year on writing a curriculum to train, day-to-day journalists on how to get to grips with data journalism. This is a week-long project. First problem that we have is that most newsrooms wouldn't let their people go for a week. What's the value of that? 1 week? Are you crazy? This one was successful. It was a first tryout where were people from Die Zeit, people from Süddeutsche, so big newspapers coming there. And we worked with them quite a bit, finding data, cleaning up the data, getting to grips with visualization, finding out how to publish that data. If you have a project that you worked on for a week, does your website actually support such a project, or does it press it down when the next short tweet is coming in? A lot of the systems we are working today are not in support of long-term projects. It's a problem. So that leads to tools. This is an article that is by now 6 years old. It was written by Adrian Holovati, who is a journalist, developer. He actually developed Django, which is a programming language. And in this article, he said that newspapers are not really doing a good job to the information they get in. What he says is that every article that we are writing is basically based on structured data, but once we publish it at HTML, that structure is getting lost. Point is, that's what he's saying, if you're writing an obituary about a person, there's a name, a date, an age, and it goes on like that. So we're mixing up a lot of data that had somehow be structured before in HTML, and then it's kind of lost. And that doesn't really make sense. And a lot of people that in information architecture think that this article hits the nail, and we're wondering why it takes 6 years to actually wake anybody up to react to it. Not all is lost here. quite recently, the New York Times, again, has introduced a concept called R-News. It's supported by quite a few other media organizations around the world. The idea here is that the news that we're putting in digital form is actually addressable and usable in databases, and you can have an API and accessing the news and exchange it and make sense of it in a larger scale. But these processes of getting embedded data for the news industry is slow again. There are other initiatives like CCAN, which is trying to be a data hub in the sense of if all the journalists in a newsroom start collecting data, cleaning up data sets, where is it stored? Is everybody, doing it alone? Where's that data from last week? Oh, it's on the desktop of our freelancer and he's not there this week. So it needs to be stored somewhere. The problem here is I could go on showing you tools and tools and tools. Most of us can't judge these tools because we're not using them. So whether they're really useful or held together by duct tape internally, we cannot judge. And that is not the way to go forward, Everybody has an opinion, but there's no structured approach, no strategy, whether it's a big or small newsroom. It might be a bit different and better at the New York Times or the Guardian, but from the newsrooms that I'm visiting and where I'm trying to help a bit, it's more like despair. So the third thing, and then I'm almost over, is something that is really important and needs to be discussed. And I don't have the final answer to that, but I have something like, like a tweetable answer. Potentially that helps. I would argue that the newspaper model is basically based on the idea that it's reporting something about everything. So you get a short overview of what's happening. And that is of value. And it was technology driven for 100 years times. The printing machine behind it made sure that only journalists could reach 100,000 people the next morning, right? That has changed. Today everybody can have a blog and can reach 100,000 people next minute. So the web is fundamentally different here. On the web, concepts are valuable that report everything about something. So it's the other way around. It's the idea of the mega niche. Like you can report about basically anything and you potentially find enough people that are really interested in what you're reporting, and it goes from fishing to everything, and you can have new models, but it's fundamentally different. And I would like to show you one of my favorite examples how a local newspaper can actually get to grips with this concept. This is a homicide report from the LA Times. What they're doing is they are not reporting in the like the way Adrian Holovati was criticizing it. When they're reporting about a new homicide or other crime, they first put it into their database with the name of the victim and the date, and then they write articles for sure. But my guess is that over time, such models could be even better than what the police is reporting. And that is something that every newspaper, every local media organization could do. And they could start doing that. It's not that complicated. You would have data that you know about, where you know the problems, where you can always go back to and have statistics and tell about the context and go deeper. And that's what I think is expectable of media organizations in the future, and people will expect it. And I think that leads over to what I think could be a model. I'm promoting it. I'm not that sure whether I'm going to be right in 10 years' time, but I do hope. This article was published at Nieman Lab last year, and I actually came out of a tweet, out of a discussion on Twitter with other fellow journalists. And the idea here is that I would suggest that media companies are moving away from the attention market that they are in right now. As Facebook and Twitter and other companies are much better in generating attention on a daily basis by now, but that there is a big model and a big market, a scarce resource called trust. Like for all of us, it's really hard to figure out who's right, who's telling the truth, who's actually leading us into the future, who is having the better budget model for European finance, Italian debt, German debt, whatever. We see so much reporting, but I have really hard times understanding how they try to bail out the EU instead of all this reporting. So generating trust is all of a sudden a scarce resource. If you're the authority who can tell in a story based on data, like it's a lot of journalism involved there, but with a different base and a different approach. And I'm right now looking quite a bit into models of companies that are making money with data. We discussed it last night, and it's not that easy. It's not like a ready-made. Bloomberg is making money in the equivalent to Apple, a 30% revenue and profit per year based on financial data. Now, we can't move into financial data, no way. There are other models. We've been recently with the Texas Tribune, which was really interesting. We had a small conference in Austin in their newsroom, and one thing really struck me. We asked the editors how they work. It's a little online-only local newspaper that's reporting on Texas politics. They're really successful. They're publishing a lot of data, and they get a lot of traffic from their data posts. And what really struck me was that one editor said, in this newsroom, everybody's data aware. Meaning that not everybody is a coder, not everybody is a designer, not everybody is going deep, but when they get a new story, they're looking into the data. And I think that's the start of everything. So my answer to how can data journalism save your newsroom would be threefold. Addressed to people, I would ask everybody to learn, experiment, and create teams. Creating teams is potentially key. I cannot compete with somebody who is doing programming for 15 years. But I can understand what he's doing. I can evaluate how difficult the project is that I want to do. And that's what information architects are actually doing. We're bridging the wishes of the users with the coders. So that's one role. Secondly, we need a better structure of news. We need more potential for reusing the data that we already have. Data is not a scarcity. There's too much data, or a lot of data out there. Most of it is not usable. And we're part of that problem as a news industry. And we need to repurpose the information that we already have. And at last, but that's up for discussion and even telling me that I'm totally wrong, I would suggest that we look into news and information that can be trusted. And I believe if we find ways to help people with everyday problems with app models or whatever, they would be willing to pay for that in like in a book form or so. If I could solve a really complex problem for you, financial-wise, education, I think you would be willing shelling out 10 euros for if it really helps you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mirko, for nicely framing many of the issues that are inside data journalism and around it. So economic sustainability, for sure, is one of the big issues here, both for the smaller enterprises, the freelancers, and as well for larger groups, larger teams, because you need at least some resources. We heard yesterday that maybe it's not that many resources, but you do need resources to dedicate to a project. And also, Mirko's presentation, can we have the cable?
Oh, that's right.
That's a scarce resource here too. Mirko's presentation leads on quite nicely to Dan's work at ProPublica, where you definitely seem to have a data culture, and I should recall that Paul Steiger was here 2 years ago presenting ProPublica and its first Pulitzer Prize, and gave us a little glimpse on what ProPublica does with data, but I think we'll hear firsthand from who's doing it. Go ahead, the floor is yours. Oh, this is not.
Look all right on the screen.
It doesn't appear on the screen, so.
Sorry about that. Hello?
Yeah, when it's on. Go ahead, Dan. Here.
All right. My name is Dan, and yeah, at ProPublica, we're an online-only organization, so the move towards doing more data stuff was kind of natural because we don't have a paper to put out, and so in that sense, the web was kind of our playground, and one of the natural things to do was to just look at data in different ways to display it, although it really started out with, our very first data app was something that started out from a handwritten list, or hand-typed out list. This was back when banks were being bailed out by the Treasury, and the Treasury, for political reasons probably, didn't, they would tell you, actually, they announced a few banks that they were bailing out, and then other banks kind of just heard it through the grapevine, and so there was no official list of who the Treasury was bailing out. So we had one reporter who was just writing down who he had heard had gotten, basically keeping track of all the press releases that came out. And so from that came out our first data app, which was basically a list of all the banks that had so far been getting bailed out. And then we added information about each bank, of course, and that was a really big hit because bailing out banks was a popular/unpopular topic during the recession. And as that became one of the most popular features on our site, we started moving very heavily into doing more data applications. And it started out with just me and one other web producer, and now we have two other data programmers. And so, we have an abundance of, I guess, manpower to do this. So, let me actually just. Does this work? All right. So to speak in terms of business model, we're a nonprofit, so we don't. We get a lot of our money through foundation funding, and so selling ads isn't our biggest revenue driver. But as I said, our data apps have become, are generally our highest traffic attractions. And this application that I'm showing here was something that's kind of funny. It was something I literally did on my couch, over a period of a couple of weeks, but it was based on this law that it was controversial. It came up earlier during the year. It's called SOPA, and it regarded intellectual property in the United States. And for a while previous to this January, there's a huge activist movement on it online. And at around Christmas time, I had paid attention to the law because it seemed like something that geeks, that's all right, that geeks and nerds are really getting into. And then by the time Christmas came around, I was like, oh, I should read up more on this. And there was just not very much information, and there was a lot of rhetoric against it, but there was not a lot. I wanted to know who my Congress member, or I knew who my Congress member was, but I wanted to know what his position on the law was. And it kind of surprised me, with as much talk on the internet about the law, how little actual information there was. So basically what I did, so this is what our official legislative website looks like in terms of, these are your representatives, these are the ones who sponsor their law, and then it gets worse from here. But luckily there's a lot of organizations that try to make better sense of the government data. New York Times, including, they have an API where you can just call it and be like, oh, I want to find all the Congress members who have taken a position on a certain law, or have at least sponsored it, and stuff like, their party, how long they've been in Congress, and maybe related laws that they've supported. And so from that, I built this visualization, which is simply just the faces of the people, and if they supported it, it was on the left. If they didn't, they're on the right, and then red and blue for their party. And then I added this this part I think people really liked, although I didn't even write that. That was just, hold on, let me close my tweet deck. I had a little bit of interactivity, and one of the things that people really liked was I pulled from another data source, Open Secrets, which does this kind of campaign contribution by industry, and so they looked at how much each candidate got from the entertainment industry and or the online tech industry, which are the two industries that kind of had the most at stake with SOPA. And so one thing that I tacked on was just like, well, for example, here it is sorted by how much the media has donated to various candidates. This is by internet, and this is all at the end of the whole controversy. When I started, there were far fewer people on this, and they were mostly in the yes column. But anyway, as this was a hot issue, this became our highest trafficked site in terms of single-day traffic during the blackout. Like, I remember going to bed at midnight, and we had 10 times as much traffic as we do on a normal day because Craigslist linked to us at one point. But anyway, it just goes to show you that it's hard to even call this data because it started out from a list, and I kept a spreadsheet of information like public statements by candidate. But in terms of data journalism, how it might benefit a newsroom, there's a lot of room for making data useful, even if that, I mean, again, this data was just so old. Like, I had seen so many stories about this, including this campaign contribution stuff, but this really hit a nerve with people. One thing I really wanted, that I focused on was like creating pages for each, and this is actually very easy if you do it through programming, but I created a page for every candidate so that when you Googled some candidate's name and SOPA, like, we would be the first thing to come up. And I had like a list of everything that I found about this senator. Actually, me and her staff member got into kind of a tiff online about it because I said she supported it based on her past support for a law that was even more stringent than SOPA. And then I think as the internet pressure came on her, like they like got into an argument with me, and anyway, I have like the whole like exchange here just so that people can like keep track of like, oh, what was their position and how did it change, and that data point of just like date, like again, I kind of slapped this together, but one thing I did keep track of was date in my own spreadsheet, and so this little visualization, I did this like in 1 minute. It was just like 2 different screenshots of this was when it started, or before the blackout, this was after. And this was actually the most popular version of our whole thing, was because this got sent around the internet through social networks. And again, it was just like one data point that was all part of what I already had put together, and to make it something, to give another useful variation of it was very trivial, and yet our most, I think, most viral thing that we've ever shared. So again, in terms of how it benefits a newsroom, once you have a good sense of data awareness, once you have a good sense of what is useful data and how to mash it together, there's just an infinite number of ways to kind of slice and dice it, and to very little work on your part after you've thought it through. And let me think. But I don't want to, I think when people think about data journalism, they think, oh, you got to build a database, you got to build a website, and I'd like to kind of riff off something Mirko said about the importance of data awareness, which is something that every reporter and journalist can do. And I started out as a newspaper reporter, and one of the things, and I had a programming background at that time, and so I would do stuff like, there was this jail website, which was kind of a real pain in the butt to go in and look to see who had been in jail, and so I wrote like a scraper and to make it really easy, so then like every day I could see well, who was in jail, but also like who had the highest bail amount, like who was in there for some really serious crimes. They even had like weight, so I guess I could be like who was the heaviest inmate or oldest inmate, or but anyway, I mean, I was lucky that I came from a technical background, and I had this, and this sounds very pedantic, but when people ask, like, what is the simplest thing that you can do to get into data journalism, I say just, like, keep your notes in a spreadsheet. One example is, again, back when I was a crime reporter, there was this very kind of amusing story where one day this house burned down, and the firefighters went in and found that it burned down because people were trying to grow marijuana in there, and they had hijacked the power source. And it kind of got this ball rolling where like more and more pot farms were being found in this suburb. And early on, I decided, I should keep a spreadsheet of this because the police would like release a list of addresses and how many pot plants they found. And then I would go online and look on the what's the name of the county assessor, I guess, who has the records of like when that house was bought, how much it was bought for, when it was bought for, and I kind of naively thought that, maybe I can find a pattern of like when these houses were bought and like try to predict when where the next house is or what neighborhood it's in, and that was naive, and the plot ended up unraveling very quickly because I think it was a San Francisco gang, and they had used the same housekeeper to take care of all their houses. And so one of the things that these houses do, that if you just are there to grow marijuana and you don't take care of their lawn, like your neighbors won't notice that marijuana is being grown in the house, but they'll notice if your weeds are going into their lawn. And so I think the police picked up the housekeeper, and the housekeeper told them about all the other houses that he had to take care of. So anyway, I kept a spreadsheet. One of the easy things to do was like create a map of all the pot houses, which ended up being around 50 at that time in the suburbs. And that was like a popular feature. But when I think about it, there was a lot more that could have been done besides just like the Google map. Like what the map did show is like, man, these houses were everywhere in the suburb, and this was during a time when, during the whole housing boom, and I think it was like it could have been a really interesting feature story about, wow, this is like the suburban boom, like the fact that people like this gang from San Francisco can move into a house, like turn it into a marijuana farm, like never show up except at night in a SUV to deliver stuff or take stuff away, and no one will know any better until like the house burns down. And it was just an interesting time to be during when the neighborhoods were expanding so fast. And one more thing that came out of that spreadsheet that I didn't think about until later in my career was I had showed it. Oh, what's that? Oh, yeah. I'd showed my spreadsheet to my editor, and as I told you, I had kept track of the real estate transactions, and what it had shown was that most of these houses were bought for no money down, like for $300,000 to $500,000. And what struck to me was like, and I'd been to most of these houses after they'd been busted, and I was like, wow, I would never pay $500,000 for that like crappy suburban home, but that's the way the housing boom worked. But to me, at the time, I was fairly young, so I'd never thought about buying a house, but I know that all my friends had bought houses with no money down, so I just assumed that was like the way things were done. And my editor came from an older generation, and she's like, are you sure this is right? Like, this can't be right that like all of these houses were bought like basically for free. And I think she was just aghast, but it was all on the county assessor website, and it was something that I just copied down because it was easy to, and it was easy to, it's a spreadsheet, and that. But when I think back upon it, I'm like, wow, that was like a great sign that the housing boom was going to crash. The fact that, like, again, people from out of town could come in and just like buy like 50 houses within a very short period of time. And I think there was some conspiracy with a real estate agent. But yeah, the fact that no one is like, hey, we're like giving away these houses. And yeah, like when drug dealers can start a new industry in your suburb, you know, it's probably a good sign that there's some kind of bubble happening. But again, data can be as simple as a spreadsheet. When you have a spreadsheet, you can see patterns, you can sort things. Nothing drives me more crazy when I'm working with a reporter and let's say they're doing a story on a bunch of murders, and like typically when you write a big feature, like you focus on your like 3 big cases, right? And you have like a generalized number or trends. But like if I want to turn that into some kind of timeline, like I need stuff like, you know, the date of every murder or maybe the method of every murder. And if you don't keep a spreadsheet, you don't realize like, oh, I only have like certain bits of information, and you never know.
I don't want to cut you short.
Oh, yeah,
I will
no,
get
I
back
think
to
I
this,
talked.
but I want to have a full round, and then we'll get back to many of your points. As you see, we probably are not able to give a full answer to the question, can data save your newsroom? But there are some things that are emerging. One is data awareness or data culture. Newsrooms have long insisted on a document culture, at least some newsrooms. Data culture is something to grow, surely. Another one is spreadsheet. Dan made that clear. And there are also patterns. Aaron, you started mentioning, you touched on this yesterday, that it's all coming back to this, it's not only data and manipulating data, but it's also the ability to present it. Dan, I think, showed pretty well that an effective presentation is worth a lot of many more complicated tools. But you have much more to show, so please go ahead.
Sure. So my team is relatively large. It's about 14 developers right now, and people say, oh my God, that's a lot. How did you get so many developers? The New York Times must have really invested deeply in this. Well, here's the thing. It didn't start out at 14, it started out at 3, and that 3 included me. And the other thing that people don't know about the team, and that's why I'm showing, if it could go up there. There we go. That's why I'm showing this interactive, because this predates interactive news. This was done in 2006. It was done very quickly. It was not done very easily, because at the time we had no ability to do databases of any kind online. But what it did do was show the folks who ran the website and then the then managing editor who ran it, John Landman, the potential. And it's terrible. I mean, every now and then I pull it up and take a look at it, and it's, you know, it's just god-awful. You can't even believe that this ran on the New York Times at one point. But yes, in fact, it did. But that just shows you, A, how far we've come, and B, the potential of just showing the possibilities. But because my group started out, and the other thing that people don't realize, we're in the newsroom. We're part of the newsroom. We are a news desk. But my team was formed through the business side. So my team is entirely on the technology side. In other words, I have a dual report both to the chief technology officer and to the managing editor. And why was that? Because the CTO at that time really got it. And so, but not the entire organization got it. So maybe because of that, we've always had a sort of a startup mentality and a sort of an entrepreneurial mentality. And that has extended through our journalism, trying to build the team and enculturate ourselves into the newsroom and bring data journalism into the newsroom more, particularly on the presentation side and on the web, but also on the business side. So I'm going to talk about a few things that we're doing that I can tell you right now, are not going to save journalism or even my small slice of it, but I think move us a little bit in the direction of being a bit more entrepreneurial about how we approach journalism and data journalism without selling our souls completely. So on the journalism side, this is election 2004. This is not election 1994, right? This is not that long ago. And this is how the New York Times did our election night graphics. Again, pretty awful stuff. It's dense. It's impossible to read. There's way too much detail here. Do we really need to know that 62.5% of Alabamans voted for George W. Bush? There's no hierarchy of data here at all. And worse, it was slow to update. This is not that long. This is one of the very first data-driven interactives that we did for an election night. Again, predating my team. It wasn't, I think maybe 2 years before this, when we were hand updating election graphics online. Flash forward to 2000 and, well, this is 2010. But in 2008, we started doing things a little bit differently. We started building maps. This is the graphics desk, not my team, but my team built the data platform on which this entire site sits. And we're able to do things that you just weren't able to do before. We're able to do these things simply and easily and replicate them over and over and over again. So in 2008, we spent a lot of time building this. Then when 2009 happened and there was a city election, we could do a map, charts, graphs that were this complex, this easy, within about 24 hours, 24 to 48 hours, because we had done all the hard work. So that's kind of how we're being a little bit more entrepreneurial and thinking almost like a web startup. We're building platforms in the newsroom to be able to replicate this stuff and make it easier to do these kinds of things going forward. On the more businessy side, this is our Olympics site from Vancouver. The Vancouver Olympics was a little bit of a beta test for us. Previously, and if you go, good morning. Previously, if you go back and look at some of the Olympics coverage we did in, say, 2006, you'll see it looks horrible. It looks horrible. If there's anybody from Stats Inc. here or the Associated Press, I'm going to apologize up front. Actually, I'm not, because you really should be ashamed of the work that you do. The Olympics site that most news organizations, boy, that probably didn't translate at all. I apologize for all the people who, I'm talking very specifically about the product that Stats Inc. sells most newsrooms to do Olympics data, to do this kind of thing up here. It's terrible and expensive, but there's no one out there really doing it well. So we said, to heck with it, we're going to do it ourselves. But why just do it ourselves when we can also sell it to others? So this is the CBC's website, and you'll see there's a close similarity. This is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. You're not seeing anything? Can you leave the, yeah, just leave them up if you don't mind. This is the New York Times right here, and that's the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Okay? So for London Olympics, we're going even bigger on this. We're building it out, and we've actually done a joint venture with Reuters to sell it around the world. And finally, I'm going to show you one last piece, and this is our dashboard. This is the Super Bowl dashboard. Right now, it's kind of boring and bland, but on Super Bowl night, this was very vibrant and exciting. And what I'll point out is the section over here, which is blank. This had a big fat ad in it, a big fat expensive ad. And the reason that a team like mine can actually help a newsroom is stuff like this. Because when you have a team that's capable of doing things that only exist on your website, that differentiate you from everyone else, that make it special to the New York Times, guess what? That's where advertisers also want to be. And so as a result, many of the things that we do end up getting big fat ads on them. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that my team is making the New York Times money. It's not. We are definitely not in the black. But we're moving in a new direction. We're moving the organization in a new direction. And There's now a new and finally a really interesting, two interesting developments that have happened. One is something called Idea Lab, which is an advertising side mirror of my team. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to take this idea of building interesting, data-driven interactives, but instead of putting them on news pages, build them into ad units around the site. So custom, very, very high-end, very expensive ad units. And I don't know if you saw, but I think it was yesterday, we announced the R&D lab has now taken a product that we kind of developed internally and has made it available for sale. It's called Cascade. It's a tool that you can use to sort of see how your content is being shared across Twitter and how people are interacting with it. It's kind of an analytics tool. So that kind of gives you the scope of things and how we're in the direction we're all headed in the New York Times. And I think with that, I'm going to pass it on. Thanks.
Thank you, Aaron. That was a pretty unheard of part of the New York Times, and yes, you're sure going down a line of work that I wish many other news organizations would follow here in Italy, because there is this research experimentation part, which is something you need to have the courage to invest into, but can start be rewarding. At least looks very promising. And the work, I particularly like the work on the advertising part, because I see very little of that around, and so it's kind of interesting that we have journalists thinking about that part too. We have to take care about that one as well. Kaylan, please, on to you. I loved your work last year on European structural funds, and I know you have many more things to tell us about your work.
Buongiorno a tutti. I'm going to kind of just give you some food for thought and kind of go through a couple of ideas, as I know we're getting tight on time. So when I looked at the theme of this talk, how can data journalism save your newsroom, the first thing that came into my head was, well, does that not raise the question initially, what does your newsroom need to actually be saved from? To my mind, of course, as you know, the talk description goes through, the traditional models of journalism are changing, absolutely. Newsrooms have to catch up. Journalists are playing catch up with an increasing amount of data that we have to process and present in a more meaningful way. And as those traditional models of journalism collapse, because we're in this game of catch up, advertising revenues are moving elsewhere. Journalists have less time to focus on in-depth analysis and investigation. And data journalism can help bridge that gap, in my experience. This kind of change in traditional models of journalism opens up possibilities for us to become more efficient as journalists. That can be a good thing, though my response to the question of what journalism needs to be saved from would be where the quality of journalism is compromised for an increased output, because we're faced with so much information that we're struggling to keep up. And data journalism can help, though I think it is not the only solution. So in looking at if it can save your newsroom or not, I think it's important to look at what data journalism can provide and what it can't provide. Data journalism can absolutely give you more context in an increasing world of information. It can give you new insights into how the world works. It can provide opportunities for journalists to keep up to speed with breaking news by curating streams like data, streams of data like Twitter, and accessing how thoughts in society, how we're processing information through social media, using social media tools like Facebook. And by looking at that, it can improve how we interact and how we live as a society. Though I would say that data journalism is not the key to everything. There are certain things that you will never get from a spreadsheet. You will never get the kind of insight and color and information from a spreadsheet that you will get from a whistleblower or a source or a well-developed contact in a government office or in a police station. And I think that's not to be forgotten. I have great respect for data journalism, and I think it can lead you to those sources by curating new flows of information, like from Twitter. It can lead you to the right person, but you still need that journalistic skill to develop a relationship with that person. And I think that is not to be forgotten. And what I would say is, while data journalism provides a lot of opportunities, it will not make your editor more altruistic in terms of giving you more time to do a story. We're at the embryonic stages, I think, of how this new movement in journalism will be integrated into the newsroom, because it will have to be. We will all have to catch up. But I would say it may not change how journalism is, the direction in which journalism is moving, where, you know, quality is compromised for output. What it can allow us to do is put more of a context on the news stream. So from my point of view, what actually needs to change and what newsrooms need to be saved from is how news is told, how it's valued and how it's presented. And data journalism, I don't think, answers all those questions. It absolutely gives us a new string to our bow as reporters. But I think it may not be the answer. And if we really want to save our newsrooms, what we need is a change in editorial policies where quality is compromised for output. And that was my food for thought on this one.
That was pretty clear cut, and so more editorial perspective. I hope we have lots of editors-in-chief listening to you. I would open up the floor to questions because we have less than half an hour left, and I think our speakers made a lot of interesting points and left a lot out of it, unfortunately, because of the time constraint. So we have 2 mics, abbiamo 2 microfoni in sala, se volete fare domande, if you want to ask questions, and se volete fare domande fatele in italiano, in inglese, come preferite. I nostri speaker hanno la traduzione simultanea che li aiuta. Ok, please. Lì.
Okay, grazie. Hi. I'd like to ask you all whether or not it is important in a web project, including data sets, to include the downloadable data sets or not, and why?
Simon, you do this a lot, and you put your data sets available on your website when you work.
I just think that it's a crucial part of work now is to be transparent and open about how you reach your conclusions. And what I've really noticed about just publishing data sets is that when you do it, people will come straight on and talk about the data itself. You get experts, people who know a lot about the story will then come on and say, oh, that's right, or why did you use that particular variable or whatever. And I think that to do a data-driven story which is based on a spreadsheet and not publish a spreadsheet seems kind of perverse to me. Because why not? If the story is good enough to be published and you're not revealing kind of confidential information, then I think you should be open and transparent about it. And a lot of people, and it's not just us that are doing it, I think a lot of people are doing it. I think it's kind of a key part of what every news group should do. Also, I think because also, you know, so in the UK, nobody trusts journalists, right? Nobody trusts reporters anymore. So if you can publish the facts behind your story, then I think you're kind of creating trust because you're saying, look, here's everything I had, this is how I got there. And it's more open that way.
About, I guess, publishing your data is really part of, it's inbred in the tradition of data journalism, and it's pretty straightforward. Keelan, you published lots of data sets, and I think, Dan, you want to take this one on later as well. Please.
I haven't published as many data sets as I would have liked to, but no, I think it's absolutely integral. If we're to work as data journalists and be preaching transparency, it's very important that we publish where the source of the stories, and allow people as well to use those data sets to see what they find. Because a lot of what I work with anyway is public data, so government data from the European Commission, European Parliament, or the UK government. And I think it's very important to publish where you get your research from. It allows people to interact and understand the data more themselves. So I think that's, yeah, absolutely.
Let me ask you both one question. When you publish your data, what kind of license, if any, do you use? I mean, can people reuse it for commercial purpose, non-commercial? How is this?
With the Open Knowledge Foundation, which, I mean, trying to encourage anyone I work with to adopt their policies, which is share and share alike. So open, yeah.
Okay, and you do as well?
No. Yeah, sorry, I can't do this. Yeah, we. To be honest, I've always ignored that whole aspect. So I just figured we just publish, and then we'll kind of answer for it later. And we've never had, and we've published over 1,000 data sets. We've never had a complaint yet. And I kind of figure, this is public information, often that we paid for. We're publishing, right? So stick out there. The one thing I would say, actually, one caveat, the one time we didn't publish all data we had was with WikiLeaks, the first two releases, which were spreadsheets, right, with Iraq and Afghanistan. But what we did with Iraq, we just published the list of all the IED attacks where IED had exploded. And that was about 15,000 records. And we actually went through all those manually, took out all the names because we were worried about that kind of thing. And with Iraq, we published a list of all the instances where somebody had died, but we took out the description field because that included names of informants and so on. So we're willingly where there's kind of, that's just kind of, you don't want people to die because of a data set you're publishing, right? But yeah, we just bug it out, and we want as many people to use them as possible and do whatever they like with them.
Dan, you have gone great lengths with ProPublica to obtain data. You have basically sued pharmaceutical companies to get data for the Dollars for Dogs investigation. And my understanding is that now this is public. You made this data public. You released it.
Well, we didn't have to sue them. They had been sued, and part of their terms was to make it public, but they didn't make it very easy to get. And so that's what our project did, was make this data on what companies were paying doctors easy to find and sort. And actually, I don't think we share it with like a do anything you want license. Like we've given it away to every news organization and researcher who wants to use it, but there are certain terms, including, I think, that they can't make their own app that copies our app. And our reasoning was that we had spent a good amount of money and resources to kind of pull this data together. And so we were happy to share it, but not lose our, I guess, whatever traffic we got from it. But as it turned out, like, the data that we shared freely was resulted in hundreds of stories by news outlets and researchers like doing their own thing. Like we can't even keep track of all the times that someone does a story of like the doctor in their city that is getting like $100,000. So it ended up expanding. Being generous with our data ended up expanding the reach of our project overall.
Yes, I think your take on what is it, the motto you have, copy our stories on your website, which it's great. I mean, nobody would let most outlets write anything like that on their website, but it also lets people fill in the gaps where you won't go, because local stories, you won't go for those, and it generates a massive amount of content that could not be done probably without your initial support in elaborating data. We have one statistician journalist at the back.
Well, yeah, I'm a statistician and a journalist, as you know, Guido. So I have a question on the line between statistics and journalism. I've noticed that a lot of very good data journalist examples, actually they share something in common, which is a lot of effort on looking for data which are not straightforward, kind of hidden. And once you make this effort, the statistical analysis is kind of basic, so to speak. And then you put a lot of effort again on the visualization thing. And so you make a lot of effort at the beginning, a lot of effort at the end, but actually not too much in the between, which is called analysis in a way. So my question is, do you think there is space and or need for a quantum leap, I believe, in the analytical part? Because statistics is not just finding data and somehow find a way to get an insight and describe something, you can actually do much, much more. So the question is, do you see this as an issue, or is it something that we have to tackle? And if so, how? Like, for example, building better and stronger ties between, I don't know, university departments and editors, or you just say like any data is better than nothing, any analysis is better than doing nothing. So scraping data is enough. Just trying to make some sorting is enough. Just trying to make some cross tables is better than nothing. And we, for a while, can stick to it. Sorry for the provocative kind of question, but.
So, you know, before I took a radical turn to the digital, I used to do something called computer-assisted reporting, which is a small specialty of within journalism where, you know, basically what you describe is exactly right. You spend a lot of time acquiring the data. There was a step you missed, which is cleaning the data, which invariably what you get, it's full of errors, it's terrible, you have to spend a lot of time kind of understanding it, reporting on it, understanding what it's telling you. But you're right, the analysis piece is usually very, very simple, and there's actually a pretty good reason for that. And that is, you have to explain it basically to your mom. If you can't explain to a reader what you did to get to the conclusion that you're drawing from it, you will run into big time problems. I mean, that's first. It's not true that journalists haven't used more advanced statistical analytical techniques. I mean, there are regression analyses, there are pretty complex applications of GIS and so forth. But ultimately, you have to be able to explain it in the context of a news story. And if you can't do that, you're in big, big trouble. The other side of the coin is most of the best news stories that I can think of that were data-driven, all you needed to do is sort, group, average, median. I mean, this is not rocket science for the most part. It really, really isn't. And that's the piece of it that I just, you know, fundamentally wish that I could somehow kind of convey, and maybe I'm doing that right now. And that is, you know, you can take a one-day course in basic data analytical techniques, right? Learn a little bit of Excel, learn average, median, sorting, grouping, shoot, maybe we'll even get to pivot tables. But even that's a little more advanced than you need. And knowing just those things, you'll be able to do some amazing work based on that. So that's probably why what you're seeing. Now, as far as the opportunities, I absolutely think there are opportunities. But again, you have to boil it down into something you can explain easily to readers. And that's where it all kind of falls apart a little bit on these much more advanced techniques.
I would like to add a very small anecdote to that. I'm a learner myself, and there's one interactive on the New York Times called The Jobless Rate for People Like You, which is really pushing the envelope. It's looking at the unemployment rate in the US, but it adds layers of how this applies to people of different gender and profession and education and so. And Amanda Cox, who was doing that, you correct me, Aaron? She figured out a way how to avoid the spaghetti chart by using the interactive stuff because she has 245 lines of code there. So my idea was to try build that for Cologne, my hometown. And what I would like to add is, in some cases, it makes sense to call the statistics office because they are not always hostile. If they can, they help you. If they don't, you can start all the investigative stuff as well. So I called the local unemployment office, and they sent me to the statistical department. I said, I'm a journalist. I want to build an interactive graphic. It's a new style. I know that. That's what he said. There was somebody showing it to us. And there's one guy who really wants to do it. I need to connect you with him. You know? So such surprises happen too. So it's the same thing as Kathleen said. Sometimes just getting in contact with people who know does help and get you a long way. It's not always everybody against everybody. Thank you.
Simon, please go ahead. Then I have one question for you guys.
So I think there's I think that what we often try and do is try and do stuff that anybody can replicate. And I think the world is full of kind of people who, you know, understand statistics but are terrible at explaining it. And we're kind of trying to be a kind of bridge, I guess, between those people, the people who have statistics, like the government statisticians, who know them inside out but cannot explain it in a kind of meaningful, interesting way that you can understand. And the people out there who are really desperate to understand this stuff. And as Aaron said, a lot of this stuff is not complicated. Actually, you want to show how something has changed, or the most common cause of death or somewhere. You don't need to be a statistician to do it. I think there is a lot of room for news organisations to involve statisticians more and to bring them into the process. And we're going to start something soon, in the next couple of months, where we're bringing statisticians from Imperial College and kind of rotation to be with us. But I really think that a lot of stuff that I do, I want to be able to, like I say, explain to my mother, and I want it to be something that I want to be able to explain to everybody, and that they understand straight away.
Explain to your mother and to your lawyer in the worst case, which is also important. There's one point that I think we're leaving out here, and that's how you get the data. We in Italy are struggling with this quite a bit because, well, of many issues there, but we don't always have such a friendly relationship with our statistical office. Actually, statistical office is good, but City Hall and other organizations are not that helpful, and don't really want to connect us with other people there. So where do you get your data? I mean, we started off saying basically you just have it there and you had to tidy it up, but I know that Kaylin went to great lengths to get it, and I'm wondering how it works in with you guys.
Yeah, in terms of the European Structural Funds project, the biggest challenge was gathering the data, because we were looking across the 27 member states, every language in the EU, every format imaginable. So we were really looking at a scenario where the Commission had, ticked the box of transparency, in the sense that it had required every member state to publish, but the formats and realistically how the data was presented was not transparent at all. And I think that is very much the case in a lot of scenarios where you're working with public data and have to make your own database, basically. In the case of Italy, I remember quite well with my colleague Francesca Pardo, who's in the audience and worked with the Financial Times as well, and actually getting the Italian data. The Italian data was diabolical. It was one of the worst. And I think the reasons for that was because it was broken down on a regional level. Because every region in Italy decided to report in a different way, in different formats. We were unable to automate any kind of data collection for Italy. And there was a lot of replication, because some of it was published on a regional and a centralized basis. So at the end of the project, we came up with 600,000 recipients of structural funds over 3.5 years across Europe. And looking at Italy, we had about 150,000. So it was coming up on a quarter. The data was actually Italian. And there was a lot of repetition on that. So we just had to use things like free software like Omniscope just to kind of identify replication and pull that out, but it was a bit of a nightmare.
So, but you may mostly only scrape the data, I understand. It was a patchwork, right? It was many patchwork approach. Okay.
Yeah, very much.
What I've noticed recently is that getting stuff that people think of as data is actually quite straightforward now. You want a spreadsheet of government spending or something. Although that stuff we have to do with annual reports is a nightmare, but mostly it's fine. But it's the stuff that people don't think of as data that's still tricky. So when we were after the court records for the riot stuff, which we talked a bit about yesterday, no, the courts themselves didn't think that was data. That was just records, right? Even though it's public information. So why would they give it to us in any kind of accessible format that's actually that? And so those kind of things, I think it's almost like that definitional thing of what is data. Actually, for government, they'll think So and there's a real debate at the moment in the UK about freedom of information. So the government likes freedom of information as far as it refers to stuff they publish, their spreadsheet stuff. They don't like freedom of information as it refers to stuff that we want, the requests that we put in. And they're trying to create a distinction between the two at the moment in the UK, certainly.
So one thing about working in the States is people have the misperception that the data is just sitting there growing on trees and you just sort of walk along and pluck it all off. That is not true. Data is very hard to get in many cases in the States. Obviously much easier than most of the world, to be quite honest. But having taught computer-assisted reporting in the UK before there was a FOIA law, having gone through that experience and heard from journalists, oh my God, we can't get data, so why bother? I guarantee you, you can get data. And the beauty of being in a country where there isn't a really strong FOIA law for data and electronic records, none at all, is that it's almost like a time machine. You have the ability to walk back in time, to look at what other people have done elsewhere and say, oh gosh, can I do that here? Or is there a data set available elsewhere that would apply to Italy? And you can do things that will absolutely destroy the competition. So the opportunity is huge in a country where no one is doing this kind of work, or very few people are doing this work. So I'm going to put the plug in for that.
Okay, so Italy is the land of opportunity for data journalists. We will take that as a as a takeaway line. Okay, and it's not so far blown. Let's have the last question because we're closing here, please.
You have talked about you have talked about your teams. And my question is, how many people can work in when you have a study or a case? How many people can work in until you publish finally these examples that you show with journalists and other technical staff? How many are in your department?
Yes, we went over this yesterday, but maybe you want to go back. You have the largest team, but you can...
Yeah, I do have a fairly large team, but generally the projects we work on are very, very small teams, maybe 2, 3 people. So, I mean, really the critical mass to do the kind of work, the web work that I'm showing, is probably 2 people, maybe 3, depending on their skill sets.
I don't know if anybody wants to add. Then, how's your team? Yeah, you do a lot of work on your own directly, so...
We're also a very small teams. I mean, we have 4 developers/producers, and so usually it's one of us, and then we're paired up with another reporter or 2 other reporters. So it's not like all of us in the department are working on one thing usually. And since we're a small organization, like one of us might have to do both, like the data gathering, analysis, and then the web development, which is, I mean, it's a diverse set of duties, but we're a small organization overall, so that's what we work with.
It's better to add from what we said yesterday. Sarah Cohen was here, and she was telling us that typically it's a 3-4 people team maximum, where you have a very, very well-sourced person on the topic, then a data person, and then a very good writer that helps explain it to your mom, as we say.
I mean, I was reiterate something I said yesterday. Actually, a lot of what we do is not as structured as someone called it. I guess a lot of what we're doing is very, very quick, and that's typically maybe one person. But what I was, or maybe 2 people if you're lucky. But what is very important about what's happening now is, like, as we all said yesterday, is that there's loads of people out there, who have the skills that you can use, right? There are developers out there, or designers, and people you can kind of bring into the process. I think that's really important to think of who are my friends here, who can help me do this, so you don't have to feel kind of isolated because you're just, you're on your own in the newsroom, there's nobody else.
I don't see people rushing for this room, so maybe we have time for one last question if there are any here. And then I think we have to clear this.
Hi. So it's really interesting to hear all the expert experience and the professional side. I just wanted to ask if you have a way to assess the feedback from your audience, so that you don't forget the readers, of course. I know that The Guardian has quite a lot of audience engagement via Twitter, that people can propose projects, data projects and stuff. So I would like to know the experience of all of you about this.
We're doing a terrible job of that. I could not agree with you. No, it's one of the, I run the community team as well at the Times, and this is exactly one of the biggest issues we have. We do a horrendous job of that. Sorry.
Dan, I think you're doing, okay, would you say you're doing a better job at your Times? I don't want to, yes?
Way engaging the audience.
Yes. Showing your work. You write data blogs. You write,
oh.
Do you want me to answer this for you? I can tell you why you're out there.
Okay, yeah, you're too shy to say this, but ProPublica for me has been. I've really always looked up to what you're doing and how you're showcasing your things and how liberal you are about giving it away. I mean, it's not that you just want the ads. I mean, you just, as I said, you have this copy our story, which is like unique.
Yeah, we're a small brand, so we depend on the goodwill of other media organizations liking us and using our work. But we have, I think, a passion to raise the bar industry-wide because, rising tide lifts all boat and all that. It's being a nonprofit. I guess we have the luxury of doing that rather than trying to sell ads. So. That's what we do in our free time.
Okay. Does anybody at the table here want to add on this, or I'll go to close the panel because we have to clear the room.
I'd like to say very, very quickly is that what surprised us about, we always knew that the apps, the kind of data-driven apps we do, the interactive stuff would be popular. But what surprised us when we launched just the data blog, which is basically just was designed to be a very, very quick and easy thing to do, was that we thought it would be read by a few developers. There would be hardly anybody who would be interested in this stuff. But actually, it's kind of real people out there in the world who just want to understand a story that seem interested. So. From what we can gauge via Twitter and other social media is that it's people like to engage with the data and understand it, and that's really important to them. And also, a really big fan of ProPublica and that kind of how a small organisation can really punch above its weight by being open and transparent about stuff.
Okay, thank you all, folks, and we'll meet again tomorrow morning with some of you for the last panel on this morning. Thanks again, and the table goes on to. Table goes on to Bertrand Peccary, Aaron will stay here, and Wilfred Rutten. All of you who are interested in hearing about the Data Journalism Awards, and I think you will be, should stay in the room.